I want to thank everyone for first coming, and I think we should thank Marilyn too for the organization.
Oh, yes.
Well, there's
Is that going to be
You should be all right.
somebody sits there?
No, you should be fine.
Down here, we got a great board, a lot. Vicky practically lives down here. Bill practically lives down here. Paul with the Tribune, everybody. Roberta's the new president. So there's not one person that's making this work. It's a whole group.
Now, we have sponsored a couple of these earlier last year, walkthroughs to Genoa. We had the pleasure of having approximately 25 people at each of those we walked through the village of Genoa and found some of the high spots that are used to be there and they're no longer gone. And so I thought maybe it would be a good idea to maybe in this case can't walk through the town, or we could. I thought if we'd have a little map here. I wasn't quite expecting so many people, but thank you for all coming. I was going to start. I have a lot of nice pictures that I've accumulated over the years, and I'd like to start from here. We'll make believe we're down here in King Ferry, and we're going up Route 90. Going east towards Locke, and this is the Four Corners of Genoa up here, going towards Auburn and going 34 south to Ithaca. My first stop here, coming down West Hill, these items that are in the red are homes or businesses that used to be and the buildings, in most cases, are no longer there. The first one is the Hewitt place. That dates back into the 1875, and it ended up, it's no longer there, but it's passed on down through the families of the Hewitts, the Sellons. The last people living in this place was John Hildreth. Then we come down to the Smith residence, and the last people, I'm going to mention names of people who lived there, and right now Stacy Hilliard lives there, Alice Zawacki, if people remember Alice and Danny Zawacki, they lived here. This next little house is where Charlie Foster lives. That was built by Donnie and Jean Ann Redmond. And this little dotted line years ago, back in 1875, this road went around, and they built it no longer there, this road, which came around and joined into North Street. The next house was back in 1875 was the Boyer residence, and then on down through the years, Mildred Myers taught school at Genoa. Bert Baker and Mary Baker owned the property, and it's now into an apartment house owned by an individual in Groton. The next place here was the Lester place back in the 1875s, and was moved. Different various families moved it. It's probably this house and probably the Hagen house up here are probably two of the nicest homes in Genoa as far as architectural.
Which one is the Hagen house?
Hagen house is up here. Cheryl and her husband Shields live there. Cheryl and Randy Shields live there now. Al Solero had this home here, and he also owned various properties around. He also owned a skating rink at one time. He also owned was invested in the Genoa Hotel, I think.
Where's the skating rink?
I'll come to that down here J.B. Young lived here on the corner. That was built by the J.B. Young. You also had where the IGA store is now, one of those stores. J.B. Young had the store up until 1890, and then Dave Smith, my wife's great-grandfather, bought the business. This little building, the little gray building that sits in Genoa now on the corner of North Street and 90, used to be on the J.B. Young property, and that was moved over and put here on the corner. It used to be a chicken house, and then over the years, different businesses have been in there. Carl Inman, then there was a barber. Carl had the barber. They had the pool hall and billiard in the back, and he had the barber shop in the front. Genoa General Insurance was in there. The three guys, Doug Hand and a couple other fellows, sold televisions, and then it ended up the last people was the Genoa Insurance Company. If we go up North Street, there's a couple businesses. The Waldo sisters owned the Genoa Tribune. That's where it originated or started on North Street, and that is where the Genoa Post Office is now, or where it was built. This building also was used for the Rebecca's and Oddfellow Hall at one time. It was torn down in 1960, 62, in that range, and Dave Nettleton built a laundromat there, and then since then it's gone into the post office. The Lodge and Rebecca's used to hold meetings also on the upper second floor of the IGA store. Coming up North Street
Pete,
is...
just a second. Dale and Jean, do you want to come over where you can see? You sure? Dale?
I'm fine, I can see.
You've lived it.
We can go by names, Marilyn.
North Street was a blacksmith. At one time, there was 4 blacksmith businesses in Genoa at one time. Then we came up here, and on the end of North Street, the dead end, it was owned by the SF Sellon family back in the 1800s originally, and then in 1911, Fred Adolph lived there from 1911 to 1924, and he was a gun maker, very popular gun maker. Coming back down North Street, we're going to, here on the corner of 90 and South Street, the red building is no longer there. It was built by the Maston family the second time. We had a fire in 1907 that burned this building here, jumped the creek and burnt the Hagen place, and it burned everything down South Street. It was a devastating fire, and I guess they did save everything east, or everything west was burned too. And I got a lot of dates in the back of my mind here. 1907 was a fire. The Mastons built this in 1909, rebuilt it, and I have nice pictures of it. After I go through this here, you can we're going to open up maybe some tables and put the pictures so you can see them. So I'll hurry through some of this. We have a Genoa cheese factory, or cheese plant that was down here on South Street. That's no longer there. And then down a little further on South Street was Howe's Mill. And then you go on down and there's the A.T. Smith family back in 1875, but now it belongs to the Charles Bauer family and Greg and B. Bauer. Coming back up here, Freeman Hagen had a grocery store here and a business at the same time. There was quite a few, in fact, there was 3 or 4 grocery stores or places to buy groceries. Across the road from was Roller Mill, and the last person to own that was Floyd Hoxie. That was Elizabeth Arnold's father.
Was Hagen, Toby Hagen's ancestor?
This would be his grand folks.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
This denotes, this area here denotes the bridge. This was the dam that was built in, that went out in 1921. They had a flood and it took this dam out. And this little red building between the store and the creek, it used to be a tobacco factory. They made cigars. I got a picture of that, and I got some of their advertising. This represents the different businesses that happen to be in Main Street in Genoa. They've changed over the years. It used to be the mill, and then there was a meat market, there was a clothing store, Singer's variety store, the drug store, Banker's drug store, and then it became Corthell Max and Ralph Eckers. And then here on the end was the post office. The post office has been in 4 or 5 different places in town over the years. It's been here, it's been down here in the west of the Aston store. It's now back here. It used to be in the groceries, in the IGA store. It's moved around, and hopefully we can keep it for a few more years. And, I haven't heard anything about them closing it. Their lease comes up next year. Moving up to the fork, up through town here, across the street is where it used to be the Sill residence back in 1875, and then Corthell Mack, Dory Mack Reynolds, his father lived there, Dory lived there, and years before that it used to be a meat market. Going up the road was owned by the Miner family, and then the Manzaris bought it. This building no longer there. It used to be a hardware, and that's where a hardware store, and even the Sellons, I think, owned that at one time. And there's the Genoa clock makers. We have evidence that the Genoa clock company was, Empire Calendar Clock was located here. And going up a little further is owned by the Miller family back in the 1870s. And maybe some of you people remember John Milliman, who was sheriff of our town, or of our county. Sheriff John Milliman lived there. And Warren Lyde, who was our principal at Southern Cayuga, and Genoa lived there, and the last people now is Margaret Ducey and her daughter and son-in-law, her son and daughter-in-law. Going up on the four corners of Maple Street and 90 and Academy, this house here on the corner was an apartment house. Henry Stack lived in this home at one time. And going up Academy Street, the Baptist Church was located here. That's no longer there. I have pictures of them taking the building down, and I have pictures of it in its original state. On the 4 corners of Maple Street and 90 was our First National Bank, and that went out during the Depression. The building is no longer there. Coming up Maple Street is the skating rink that was owned by the Solero family and Van Marder family. And even Dr. Mosier, Joe Mosier, the veterinarian in town, owned it for a small period of time. And it went out, and the skating rink was up on the second floor, and they remodeled it, and it became a garage where they sold automobiles at one time. In fact, it was in 1913, between 1913 and 1917, there was 17 different automobile dealers in the township of Genoa. 17. They sold everything from Essex to Studebakers to, there was a whole list of different cars.
And what years was that?
Between 1913 and 1917. King Ferry had the Ford, that was, so. There was a lot of cars sold. Coming on down through Maple Street here, Dr. Skinner, who ran the hospital up here. Dr. Skinner owned a home here on the curve. Donna Armstrong lives, not in this house, but on that lot now. And this down here on the end of Maple Street was where the Genoa Fair was held in the 1900s. I have a couple of their fair books here you're about to look at. 1903, I have two of them. 1903 and a 1909. They had a grandstand, which I have nice pictures of, and they have the fairgrounds horse track. They used to race horses. They came from all over the Northeast to race horses here. Continuing on up Maple Street to Route 90, on the left-hand side was the Genoa clay and tile plant. They made tile and brick between 1902 and 1920. This is no longer there, but when the leaves are off, you can see forms of the foundation of the I'm going to come back here and go on up through go down Academy Street, across from Maple Street, Academy Street, and this is where the Genoa Academy was held. I have I guess it's over on the table. 1849, the Genoa Academy was here, and a gentleman from Poplar Ridge came and got in 1845, excuse me. In 1845, he canvassed the area and he recruited up to 300 people, students, 300 students, and that's the
Children, you mean?
children,
Yeah.
students, and they came and then stayed at different homes in Genoa for a minimal fee of, cents on a dollar for a week or something like that.
Did you say 1845?
1845.
Who was the man from Poplar Ridge?
I have his name.
Was it Wanzer?
Pardon?
Was it Wanzer?
Sounds right.
I can't think of his first name.
And he ended up leaving after a while, and I think he went to Aurora and started another one, but then he went on somewhere else. Rochester, ended up in Rochester, I think. And then the Genoa had the Genoa School, the building, and then in the cornerstone on the brick building was 1939, and the Genoa School operated as a high school, central school from 1939 to 1979, a 40-year period. So the building was actually used for about 40 years. So I'm thinking about the Southern Cube, the building up here. That's over 40-some years now. So
Is that building used for anything now?
It's just used for storage now, still owned by Richard and Victoria Mackenzie Childs. Going up through is we come to the Genoa Hotel, which was a Selin house originally. Then it became the Carson Hotel when the DeWitt Hotel here burned in 1907. Mr. Carson bought it, and then it passed through various people's hands over the years, and John McDermott owned it, and right now the Turk owns it, and it's called the Genoa Hotel. Now, the little red building here, I drew it in there. It used to be a blacksmith shop there, owned by Archie Loomis. The last one to own it was Archie Loomis. And it was really affiliated with the Stevens Machinery Company that had here where it's an open lot now where the fellows shoot these horseshoes now in the summer. But it used to be a Stevens Machinery building and shop there. They sold machinery. And then it converted into the Gem Theater, remodeled into the Gem Theater where they showed silent movies, and it was a gathering place that would, for community center, and it would seat up to 500 people. That's no longer there. We go up Stevens Street is the Presbyterian Church originally, and now it's the United Church of Genoa. When it converged, when the Baptist Church went out, they became the United Church. Across the street was the Universalist Church in 1829, Universalist Church. 1829, then over the years it became the Catholic Church, and now the Catholic diocese years ago sold it to a private individual. And
So the building's still there,
the building's still there, yeah.
so how come it's in red?
I made a mistake. Then we go up the street a little further, and this is where the Genoa Hospital was. And that burned in the early 50s. And that was a 3-story hospital. Dr. Skinner, Dr. Guard, there were a couple doctors in town at that time. There was also a house attached here, and Dr. Skinner worked out of that for a while too, as well as having a home down here on Maple Street. Going up a little further, we come to what we call now Bradley Street, but it was originally Cayuga Street, and its name was changed to Bradley Street, and I assume because here on the corner is where Shirtliff's Funeral Home is now, but it was built by J.D. Atwater and Archie Bradley for their son and daughter-in-law. They built this beautiful home there, and it's a funeral home now, but Archie and J.D. Atwater had that home built for the newlyweds. That's Marion Atwater and Archie Bradley III. And it used to be a nursing home. After Bradley's, the family left, it became a nursing home. And I should shoot back down here to this home down here where one of the nicer homes in town, as I spoke of earlier, that was the Murray Nursing Home when the Murrays were in this hospital. Didn't burn as a hospital, it burned as a nursing home. Another mistake I made. But Burries came down here to this nice home and made it into and they were operated as a nursing home for quite a few years. And then it went into a private individual. Going up here to there's another blacksmith shop here on Bradley Street. And we curve around and go over, this takes us back up to, and I got a couple more mistakes, Susan, here. I put on here the Atwater Bradley. It was a hardware. I put that building there, but I think it really belongs where the train station is.
Yeah, it was where the town barns are, Pete.
Yeah. They had various different, they sold coal, hardware, they even had a area where people could bring livestock for sales. And it had to have been housed all back in this area here somewhere. And I'm gonna move my train station across the street, or across the road, on the south side of 90. And it isn't in proportion here, so you'll have to bear with me. The short line came down through. Now, Genoa had two railroads, but on the same set of tracks, but different eras. This first train came from Auburn to Ithaca, and it went out of business in about 1889. Between 1887 and 1889, I believe, it went out of business. We had, and they, from reading, they used to have, we had a terrible winter in 1987, 1886, 1887, where one of the years it snowed every month of the year or something. It was called one of the coldest years. And the train back then got stuck on the railroad between here and Auburn somewhere, and it was held up for months or weeks, I guess. They couldn't get through, and it was devastating as far as their bottom line, and it forced them to file bankruptcy and go out of business. That was in I think around 1889, but in 1902 they got a group together to try and get another railroad going to move product and move people. It lasted from 1902 to about 1921, 1922. Then the short line went out of business because of the automobiles and the trucks, traffic, and roads were built a lot nicer and better for transportation, so they lost out on that. It still could move people, but people wanted to move themselves, I guess, in individual cars. Well, coming up, so I'm gonna move my train station over here on the south side. Here, it used to be a machinery dealer, and the last thing to operate out of this building or in that vicinity was the Wheeler cider mill. And they used to years ago have, like, people would bring apples for dried apples and things like that, and be shipped out of there. Going up to the four corners of 90 and 34. Back in 1875, the property belonged to the H.M. Raymond family, and then over the years it was the Gulick family ran it as a restaurant, and the little red building in front used to be a little gas station, and the last person to run that gas station was Billy Grant. And the Gulick family, and then it was remodeled, this building, into the Tamarack, owned by the Shields family, Annie's father and mother. Going across over on this corner, back in, the original owner on the corner was the L.B. Hewitt family. And in 1928, William Warren had it, and that corner building there, and he had what they call the tea room. And then in 1932, the Warren family sold it to the Claude Sullen family, and it was called the Homestead Inn in 1932, and in 1934 it burned to the ground. It was rebuilt by the Manzari family, then went on into the Mike and Thelma Barnhart ownership, then into Roland Osborne, who had it for a gas station and groceries. And then he sold it for a short period of time to an individual, I don't know. And they ended up selling it to the Pit Stop, which is now the Pit Stop. I guess if there's any questions that I can answer, we can go from this. And what I'd like to do is maybe put out the tables and you can go through any of the pictures that I have.
That, Peter, that short line railroad is the train that my grandparents came in from Kansas in 1919.
1919.
And on February 7th, we're having just memories, it's just a chat thing of your memories of the train, so that would be kind of fun if anybody's interested in that to come and just share. The other one is the Baptist Church. That was the garage, Marilyn's here, that's your garage
My
now,
garage.
right?
Yeah.
That's what her garage sets now.
Anybody else related to any of these spots up here?
I grew up with a Maryland.
I got a little point of interest on this House Mill, which is on South Street. This was like a grist mill. This mill here was a flour mill. This grist mill, anybody heard of Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania? Okay. Dale Searles, whose mother and father, and Dale was the only child, they lived about 2 miles east of the Four Corners. Ada and Alton Searles, and they had a son, Dale. Dale ended up working for a forge, a welding company over the years, and I guess he still does. He lives down near Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania. Well, one day he was touring around the country, and they came across one of these old millstones that they used to have in the stones. And there was there was a label on it, a brass label, he said, and there was an elderly man there, and he got to talking with him, and he said this mill down there near Slippery Rock was a mill no longer there, but the rock was still there, the stone. And he said, got to talking with Dale, and Dale said, gosh, that's interesting. He says, yeah, he said, the mill used to sit here, and this mill, the the machinery part of it was, came from a place in upstate New York. And then he said, it's called Genoa, New York. What they did is dismantled this mill, took the machinery out, and shipped it by rail to Pennsylvania. And that's where it ended up down there. And this little, the stream came down through, and this causeway, or raceway, is where the water was diverted to create water power and then back into the stream. And if you go down there now, you can still see some of the foundation, and you can also see some of the metal. This raceway was made out of wood, round thing with the metal staves, and there's 2 of those metal staves still still intact down there.
Hey, where was Charlie Perkins feeding in life?
Charlie's right here at the
Used to do business with him, but it's been so many years.
the Maston store. That used to be right here on the corner of South Street and 90.
Okay.
Maston store, this was a hardware store, and they sold grocery hardware, and also they repaired clocks. And then over the years, they converted it to Stack and Turk.
Yeah.
Stack and
remember
Turk they converted it into a feed mill. And then Stack and Turk ended up selling it to Zimdahl. I thought his name, no, Charlie sold it to Zimdahl. Charlie Perkins had it. Charlie Perkins had it, and he sold it to a fellow by the name of Zimdahl, and then I think Zimdahl sold it to Al Kruger. Al Kruger.
Truck and tractor.
Yes, he did.
And Al owned it for not too many years, and then it went out of business, and then my wife and I lived in this next little place right here, the Minor place, and we ended up, after 3 or 4 years, it was really rat infested mill, so Al came to Judy and I and made us an offer we couldn't refuse, so we bought it and tore it down, and we, Don Addy, he's passed away now, Don Addy lived over here on Hill Road. He tore it down for me, and he rebuilt a barn or something, and we've used some of the lumber ourselves and added onto the store. And we put it in the lawn there.
So that first black one is your museum?
And the first, let's see, yeah, the first one here is my little museum here. And then the second one here is the Waldo girls, their sisters. They also owned this little building here, and that was where they had the Genoa Tribune at one time too. And then it was a post office, and now it's the beauty parlor, or the Dodge City Clippers. And then the next place is where it was owned by the Booth family, and the Redmond family. I'm going to jump quite a few years, and the Redmond family came into town in the late 50s or early 60s and became the funeral home.
That related to John Wilkes Booth?
Late 40s speed.
Pardon, late
48, I think.
48.
48 or 49.
Okay, and that was the Redmond funeral. And then this was the Hurlbut place.
Where Hurlbut's?
A.J. Hurlbut, that was dates back in the 1870s, and that's where my wife's great-grandfather and grandmother lived. They got a beautiful home. They had a beautiful home, and that caught on fire and burned, and that's where Judy and I just put our modular this past year. That's where we live
Where did you grow up?
Maple Street.
now. About halfway down here, not halfway.
No, the fifth house from the corner. And if I run to school, it used to take me 50 seconds. If I walked, it took me 3 minutes.
Pretty good.
Peter?
Yeah.
My Aunt Tabitha used to talk about somebody who was trying to, I guess, murder his wife, and he put straw down on the street on Route 90 so that it wouldn't disturb her while he was trying to kill her. Who was this? You don't know anything about that, huh?
You sure that wasn't Billy Green over on Billy Green Hill? Coming up a walk?
The only one I can recall is there was a 21-year-old girl found dead in this home here. It is no longer there. She was sort of I won't say a maid, but she was around 21 years old, and she did house chores for the family. She didn't live there, but one day they found her dead in one of the rooms on a bed.
No one.
What year was that?
No one's.
Bones. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, was it a murder? Poison.
It was was, no, I guess not. Okay,
It's too
Is the
bad.
sycamore, is the sycamore tree still by the Genoa Hotel?
yes, that's still
We
there.
measured that one time. Has anyone here ever measured it in its circumference at the base? We did one time when we were there.
You measured, it, yeah.
Yeah,
On the big tree.
we come out 19 feet 6 inches is what we got, and we got the same measurement ironically from the large oak on Route 90, which would be just on the edge of Aurora, on the north edge of Aurora, on the east side. Same,
Is that still
diameter.
there?
Yeah, the big oak,
Yeah,
yep. Kind of incredible, the two would be about the same size.
same age.
Probably same age, yeah.
How many people really grew up in this area? In this area, or in this
Oh,
area?
that is. Oh, okay. Yeah, we were in Venice Center.
Being the only ones.
Close enough, right?
We went to school there. Spent a lot of time there. Yep.
Well, how many people grew up in the town of, the whole town of Genoa?
Oh, the whole town,
The
all
whole
right.
town, including Kingsbury. So, I don't know this lady.
I was Jean Klassen,
Gee, that's,
Are you still around here?
live in the village of Cuban.
From down there in King Ferry?
My dad was a rural letter carrier.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I used to run all your brother then, Eric.
Eric class.
Eric.
Gee, about, the class of 56, 57, around there.
Oh, 61, too, maybe.
Yeah, so, yeah, so I was-
He went to King Ferry though.
yeah.
Oh, in the King Ferry.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that much about it.
Is her dad Carl?
That's
Yes.
the next store.
Okay.
Only it's converted into the feed mill.
How many people, this is the first time here? Well, I hope everyone will sign the guest book before you leave, because that helps us out a little bit. And check out the schoolhouse, even though it's a mess, we just had some major construction done on the bathroom, so some of the bathroom stuff is in the schoolhouse.
I was
But,
gonna say, if they wanna go in and check that out, we could set up a table and put the things out so they can see on the pictures.
great. Anything else you want to say?
Supposed to have an outhouse.
What?
Supposed to have an outhouse for the school.
We have an outhouse, yeah. And in better weather, we have the barn.
That might be it from the
Genoa Fair,
Fair.
because I have a,
Yeah, but,
I have a canoe.
oh, well, there's like no date or nobody made it or
It's
anything.
sometime between 1903 and 1909.
Okay.
Wax.
No, it's glass.
Glass. And I have a canoe.
I think we're all that.
Yeah, I won't blame them
That's
there.
good, because I got quite to know. Yeah.
One more question. How many people only came because they're your siblings? One, two, three, over there.
My sister Emma Jane and my brother George.
And
My aunt, my sister Ann.
she was here.
She's out in the outhouse.
Probably
Can
so.
you give a general idea of how many people live, average population of the village that we just talked about, that you just talked about?
I'm gonna be a guess. I'm somewhere in
I was going to relate to today versus,
350.
There was more there in 1800 than there is now.
In 1880 census, there were more people in the village of Genoa than there was in 1980, 100 years later. There was more people in the village of Genoa, residents, in 1880 than there were in 1980. And at one time,
There was more business in Genoa.
yeah.
at one time, Genoa was larger than the city of Auburn. This Route 90 was a main road to King Ferry, and then they used the ferry across. And it was a way of transportation, but over the years, it's changed. So, if there's any other question, if you want to tour the little schoolhouse in there, I'll set up a table, and I got oodles and noodles of pictures. With the IGA store here, it was originally Smith's Bazaar, Smith's Big Business Store, and in 1930 it became the IGA, who were independent business owners who were trying to compete with Grand Union, A&P stores. Maybe the younger generation doesn't even remember them. But they were big conglomerate, big stores. So these independent grocers formed IGA, owned their own business, but could buy and compete with the big chain stores. My wife's great-grandfather, D.W. Smith, started the business here in 1890, and my Judy and I served about close to 40 years here, from the 60s to the year 2000, and then we sold it to our oldest daughter, Lori, and they've had it for the last 11 years. Great-grandmother and grandfather Smith and grandfather and grandmother Smith never threw much out. So a lot of this inventory in this building was upstairs in the store, so I brought it over in the early 90s and took this building, which used to be our one-truck firehouse, store to display the items. And it's been fun putting it together, and a little history on this building. The firehouse, originally our fire company was started, the Ball store got going in 1910, and the firehouse was between the store and the crick, believe it or not. But really they never got going until about 1915. 10 years or 5 years to organize and get a fire district and get chemical engines. They ordered 2 chemical engines. In fact, they had the bell before the district was even formed. They bought a fire bell. And then in 1921, there was a dam across the creek from back of the store over to where the firehouse is now. But where the firehouse is now used to be the Hoxie grist and roller mills. And there was a dam across there that created energy from the dam to run the mill. And in 1921, we had a severe thunder showers and storms up north of town here, as far north as Venice Center, and it flooded and came down through, and it took out the dam over in Little Hollow. It took out the dam here in Genoa, and it also undermined our firehouse. So they had to relocate, and they relocated over here in 1921. And the fire department, they had a one-truck firehouse. I do have some pictures. It's probably going to be hard to just show them at this time, but
Can we come back and look at them?
come back and look at them. Okay. This gray building here originally wasn't there. On the west side of the store, on the back, this west side, you can see where the clapboard has been filled in back in the 1890s to 1900, before the railroad came back through. They had to go to Locke with horse and wagon. They bring freight back to the store, and that's where they backed the wagon in. Up on the 3rd floor of the building is the big wheel and trap doors where the wagons were backed in, and the barrels of molasses and flour, sugar, heavy things were lifted up with a big wheel and cable rope up onto the 3rd floor, and that's where it was stored. And then eventually this building was moved in, and it became it was Mr. Solero originally had it, and he had a billiard hall in there, and then it became various things over the years. It's been a Dutch TV shop, 3 guys, repair shop, a barber. Carl Inman spent quite a few years there as a barber shop, and insurance office. When I fully retire, I hope maybe to get it going and maybe buy and sell stuff.
Treasure.
It was moved, I believe it was moved in from over in back sometime. Yeah.
Did you see it started with a billiard parlor? It's modular, septic, all that.
Yeah, oh yeah, even Carl was there earlier. This building next door was originally a home by the Mrs. Waldrose, and it became over the years it used to be the Carl Inman was in there.
An umbrella
shop,
over you.
post office.
I have one in the car, I'll grab
Across the street, this is probably one of the nicest homes. This one here, Hagenwood, but it's owned by Karen Shields now. Karen and Randy Shields. Beautiful structure, beautiful woodwork, beautiful staircase, and just a lovely, lovely home. There used to be a nice big home here on the corner where the trailer was too, but that became disrepaired, and they ended up being a controlled fire burn a few years back. Rather than go up North Street, I can explain pretty much what is on North Street. Where the post office is now used to be the Genoa Tribune print shop. And there was also across the street, there was a blacksmith shop. Out back in the store, there used to be with a mill pond. There used to be a building there where they cut ice in the winter and stored ice blocks of ice. And going up the street, really the most important thing, probably the very last house on North Street, which is Mrs. Seville lives there now, but that was where Fred Adolph, he was a gun maker, made guns during World War I, and shipped them all over the country or even out of the world, over the world. And it's a very well sought after gun if you can find them. And Jim owns this nice home right over here. Yep.
Isn't that where Murray's had their
I was gonna say it was a
nursing home at
nursing
one time?
home in my day.
Yeah, originally it was a
Seems to be a lot of things.
originally, yeah,
Thank you.
originally a nice home built there. I don't know whether it's rumors or not, but Les Bauer told me that Brigham Young worked on that home. Whether it can be, substantiated, I
It's
don't know.
hard to say what year the house was built. Right? I read records were 1840, and they call it an 1840 house.
1840.
So you don't really know whether it was built in 1840 or they just reported it.
And then when Murray's took over the hospital, which went out of business up here, they had a nursing home in the hospital, and that burned in the 50s, and they moved down here and made it into Murray's nursing home. And then it back in the early 70s. mercantile building built in
Around the front of these.
1909.
Doesn't matter. Choose one so they
But
can see.
originally, the building burned in, the original building burned in 1907. On the corner, right across the street here, but before you get to the creek, was the Car's DeWitt Hotel. The DeWitt Hotel stood there, and a building here that caught on fire in 1907. It burned the building across the creek, and it burned different little businesses. You can, when the fall, when the leaves are gone, you can see foundations down along South Street.
And how did they fight the fire? They didn't have the fire truck yet, right? 'Cause that
No.
came later?
Hey,
They
just
weren't
bucket
ready,
brigade,
that's
that's
right.
1907. The fire truck. They burned this building here on the corner. You can look at this later, but this is a picture of the hotel. This is the picture of the hotel that caught on fire, and it burned this building. It set on this side of the corner, and it jumped the creek and burned this building, and these were rebuilt. This was in 1907. In 1909, Harv and Rob Maston built another nice building. I have pictures of it. You can see later. A mercantile building. They sold also groceries, repaired clocks, hardware, things like that. And they owned this building up to about in the 1950s, and that's when Stack and Turk converted it into a feed mill, grinding brisket, grinding feed. And then it went into another couple by the name of Mr. Zimdahl bought it and continued the business, and then Mr. Kruger, Al Kruger, bought it and continued business for 4 or 5 years, and then he went out of business in the 70s, and it laid vacant here, going downhill, rat infested. So my wife and I, we lived right up back of it, and he came to us and said, "You ought to buy it." So we bought it and cleaned it up. A fellow by the name of Don Addy up here, he's passed away now, but he took it down for the lumber. We took some of the lumber and added onto the store. He took the rest of it and built a barn or did different things with the lumber. And we just turned it into a lawn. And we did retain this building here. They also stored seed, feed and fertilizer in this building, and over the years. It also was used by Jim Heyer, who was a gentleman here in town who repaired cars and used it for that purpose. And we used it for a few years for just storage, and then I converted it over into my little museum. We'll continue. We have a couple things down South Street.
Butch and Bonnie, did you want to say anything about this corner?
Which,
On this side,
did the fire department build this building or was it an existing building?
it was. I've read where it was moved
Okay.
from over there
To
over
here.
here.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
After the dam went out, it undermined the bank and everything, and they said, the article read that they moved the building to this location.
Okay.
That's the fifth. Another little tidbit is the fire department at the time, somebody thought they were negotiating to buy this corner here from the Stack and Turk. And that's where they was going to put the firehouse instead of over there.
Interesting.
But that's
Yep. Yep.
passed on
Never
down.
heard that.
I never
Heard that one.
No.
But ended up Stack and Turk ended up buying it.
And,
He was a lawyer.
when the bell got cracked at the firehouse, Tom Turtle's barn burned. Somebody rung it so hard they cracked the bell.
Cracked the bell. Yeah. So we'll wander down South Street.
Yeah, it quit.
Grandpa,
I won't
if
pay
you
that.
want,
What's that right here? That burned in 1907.
this road?
Three different names. Mill Street, Water Street, now it's South Street. We lived here for almost 50 years. We sold it this way. That's a good speed right there, Marilyn, and I can talk. This was our home for almost, This was our home for almost 50 years. It was owned by the Miner family originally, and then Dr. Mosier lived there from 1920 to 1962. He died before that, but his wife lived there till 1962, and that's when we bought the home. Originally, this home here had all the land up almost to the top of the hill. This was all, except for a couple of mercantile buildings here on the corner. We got a late comer. This home here is owned by my son Peter and his wife Jackie. This is the home of Floyd Hoxie. Elizabeth Arnold grew up here. If everybody knows, well, new people probably don't, but Elizabeth Arnold grew up here as a young girl. This was Floyd Hoxie's home. And, Floyd had a son, Alan, and his wife lived here for a few years too, and then they built a place up on Indian Field Road, and the house became vacant and run down for about 15 years. And my son got married and made Alan an offer to buy it. And Alan Hoxie wasn't anyone to sell anything, but Alan did say, if you're going to stay in Genoa, I'll sell it. So my son bought it, and they've lived there now about 18 years, I think. But that's Elizabeth Arnold's hometown home.
Whoa, he's still going. He's still going.
Used to rotor till our garden out back.
Oh yeah, motor lawn and everything.
This home on the right here is owned by Francis Sherman now, but Francis Sherman was Myrtle Inman's oldest son. Myrtle had two sons, Herbert and Francis, and Herbert passed away with cancer a few years back, but Francis still lives. Myrtle still lives. She's 102, I believe, now. She mowed her own lawn up till, well, she was over 100 years old when she's in Moravian Nursing Home now. But she turned the home over to Francis, her oldest son, and Francis lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but they have the place for sale now. This is the oldest known home here in Genoa, owned by the Waldo sisters. The Waldo sisters also owned the Genoa Tribune, the two sisters. And
How old does the house be?
it's just known to be the oldest house here in town.
Got to make it the early 1800s, late 1700s.
Yeah.
Late 1700s, I'd say somewhere 1791.
Two homes across the road. I've of course grew up here in Genoa, and all I can remember is who lived in them. Blanche Hand used to be the worked in the post office. Blanche lived here. Ted Rogers and his family. Ted Rogers was the custodian up at the Genoa school for years. Peter O'Connell lived here for a few years. He was a school teacher. Right now it's owned by Scott and Tanya Birch, who ended up buying this home over here, which Theron and Jane Traver lived, that I can recall, and also Blair and Gert Reeves. They, of course, Blair and Gert have passed on. Jane is still living. Theron Traver passed on, and that's about all I can remember about these homes here. Scott and Tanya live in Texas now, and they are in the process of trying to sell both of these properties. So they bought a place in Texas. He worked at Cornell University and got transferred, and he works down at Texas A&M.
I live right next door to there.
Oh, yeah?
Corpus Christi.
Corpus Christi. Yeah. So Scott was going to fly back up here in July or sometime this month. Check on it.
She's just gonna go up between now and come back.
There used to be the old Genoa Creamery, and I can still remember that being here. Farmers would bring their milk down here, small dairies, and drop off their milk, and Genoa make cheese and byproducts. And that was this area here. Mrs. Inman, over the years, it laid vacant, and she ended up buying the real estate, and it goes just down here by the driveway and up in here. So it's still, it belongs to this piece of property now, and that was the Genoa Creamery.
I can remember hauling in there.
And you remember hauling in there. Hunter family, Adlai Hunter, married Charlie Fisher. Charlie Fisher was a land surveyor, and they owned this farm here, and he sort of sublet it out. He never worked it. But Adelaide Hunter, she was an old time name, and Adelaide was the only daughter. She did have a cousin, Pauline Law, who was an artist ended up from being in New Jersey. Adelaide's cousin, Pauline, was an orphan, and she was not an orphan, but her folks died, and the Law family in New Jersey adopted her, this Pauline Law, and adopted her, and she was, the Law family owned the Law Bluing Company. If anybody familiar with washing soap, bluing, they put in washers to make clothes whiter. Well, the Law family adopted Adelaide's cousin, Pauline Law, and she ended up being an artist, and she'd come and visit Adelaide here from New Jersey. She'd always come up every summer for a week or two in a big long limousine with a chauffeur and patent leather boots. And he would either stay in Auburn or Ithaca. Pauline would stay here with Adelaide. The home across here was built by, he's passed on now, but everybody, a lot of... Les Bauer, Les Bauer, if you read the Genoa book by Ward O'Hara, Les Bauer gave Ward a lot of information, and so did his wife. And Les built this home here, and Then he ended up getting the farm down below here, and they moved down there. And then they used to live on North Street too, Les Bauer and his wife. Then my wife's stepfather bought the home after he come back from the service in World War II, and Ed Boyce, and Ed lived here quite a few years. That's where I courted my wife here. And Ed passed on and left the home to his two stepdaughters, my wife and Don Arnold's wife, Sharon, and their half-brother, Eddie Boyce. Eddie lives in San Diego, California now, and he is in the process of remodeling it and hopes to move back to Genoa in the next 5-6 years. He's in the landscaping business in California. I'm sorry to say he's in landscaping, but I keep his lawn mowed, but probably not to the tune he likes it. So right now it's gutted, and it holds all our furniture in there now because we're storing our furniture till we get our new home built. So that's Les Bauer is an old-time name here in town, and that's where he built parts of the home. Parts of the flooring is from the old Genoa wooden school building that used to be up there. The back door of the house came off the old gymnasium wooden school door, and that's been moved up to the gray building now, and I have that using up there. This is a dead-end street. There is a farm down at the end. The young Bauer boy, Greg and Dee Bauer, live down there. And this home here is in terrible shape. It is going to be sold for taxes in August.
It's supposed to have a lot of asbestos.
That's the problem. They would like to have a controlled burn, but different agencies won't allow it, I guess. So. Other than that, here on the bend, in the fall, when the leaves in the winter kill of the weeds, Charlie Bauer, who lived last year, he passed away in December, but Charlie took me down last summer, and there used to be a what they called a raceway off the creek that ran the power to the mill, and in the fall we actually could see where the raceway went, and the steel bands were still, 2 or 3 of them, you were still exposed. You could see where they must have run through a large wooden tube of some sort to create, build up enough of water pressure to create power. But that can be seen in the fall after, or early spring before the weeds come up.
How big is the farm down there?
And the dam connected over there to the north of that big tree. When the weeds are down in the fall or spring, early spring, you can see some of the stonework, and it went across the dam over back in here. You can see the picture later, but this is the mill that used to set right here. Hoxie's roller mill. It was owned by an individual before Floyd, but they ground grist, and we also ground flour here, and it was called the Pride of Genoa flour. And it also had a name of Superior Flour, Genoa, New York, and I have a couple of the bags in my museum. Going up the street next to this mill, there used to be a meat market originally, years and years ago, a meat market. And we also, this whole section up to through here was our business block. We called it the business block on this side, and partially over here, and it skipped this is another beautiful home in Genoa, the old Hagen home. Hagen's used to have a mercantile building here where they sold groceries and things. Over the years, they also, it's been the Banzai family owned a section in there. They had a gas station, sold automobiles, I remember that. And there used to be the Clinton Hardware, Al Stearns, who lived on Maryland Street, Al and the Clintons.
They Clinton Hardware.
Clinton's Hardware,
Where was that?
right here.
It was right there, wasn't it?
Van
And,
Martyr before that.
Pardon?
Van Martyr.
Van Martyr, yeah, years. Van Martyr, he also owned this here, and he also owned the skating rink, which was down on Maple Street. This building, after the hardware, was a restaurant. Had various things in there. Hardware, various gas stations. They also sold gas over here on the corner at the feed mill.
$4 gallon.
Probably 9 cents or 19 cents. Yeah, this home here was all I remember is the Hagen family, but Cheryl and Randy Shields own it now. Beautiful. The Brown House was the Corthell Mac home. There's also a meat market in the lower half. Up through here we had Mrs. Singer and her husband had businesses up through here. There's various businesses. There's clothing, pharmacy.
Bank wasn't there.
Are most of those buildings down now? They must be gone, the buildings,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Here's right here there.
Okay, right, they're all lined up.
Years we've had Corthell Mac had a drugstore there, and then he ended up selling it to the, I'm going to say Ralph Ecker. And then Ralph Ecker. It used to be Banker's Drugstore. They was the earliest one, Banker's Drugstore in here too. And then in late years, it was Joe and Leo Nolan started the sweet shop. They ended up selling it to Dave Joe. They served hamburgers and stuff like that. The post office used to be in the very last building. When I remember that. The post office has been all over town there. What says in the gray building, it's been over 2 different places over there. It's been in the store, it's been here, and there's wide rumors that it might be gone soon, I don't know. They're talking about anything less than 5 employees, they're talking about closing.
Amazing.
I haven't heard anything yet. My lease on the building comes up in the 2013.
Not quite back to back.
Try to move around, get it face.
They haven't contacted me. But postmaster said that if they want to, they can cancel the lease anytime. So we've got the meat markets, the business section, and this here. I think we can go on up to the vacant lot. This vacant lot next to the road was it used to be an old hardware store, and probably Butch can fill you in on more of what used to be here. I remember the original owners, but your family owned it.
My grandfather bought it probably the early 50s, and he had an ice cream shop in the front and then a pool hall behind it. And after that, Dad moved from Moravia and he had New Idea farm machinery here before Mike Barnhart.
Yeah. And then Lauren Krell just reminded me that the Genoa clock was up in here, this area. The Genoa clock, they made They made wood. I have a couple down in my museum, wooden carved calendar clocks. They were patented in 1887 here in Genoa and put together. And I have two. I know the Berry family still has one.
There's not many of them.
No.
I think they were made in the basement of that house.
Right over in the basement.
Yeah. And that was the predecessor to the Ithaca, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there was also a meat market here? And the clock factory?
The bottom.
Different times.
Oh.
At different times, yeah.
Yeah, Tommy's. Yeah, wow.
I'm pretty sure that's where Corthell Mac lived and Dory grew up and
Well, that's where they started and stuff, but then they moved up on the hill.
moved up. Still in the village?
Still in the village,
Where
yeah,
Harold
the second
Shields
place
was.
up there on the hill.
Oh, where Harold?
Yep. Before the Tamarack.
I remember the Allens living in there.
Yep.
Allen.
Max were there before that.
Well, they moved out of there probably somewhere around 46 and bought the farm over on the hill.
Yeah.
King Ferry over.
Who was
Dimsey
that?
owned.
Corthell Max.
Corthell and Dory Mac's father
Lived up there,
lived up there too.
where the Tamarack was?
No, this side.
This
The
side,
salmon
two
color.
houses.
Oh, where Alice Brett lives?
I don't know who lives there now. Where Shields, I think, lives for
Harold and Allen.
Harold Shields.
Lives here now, Marge, and her son John. This originally or formerly was a John Milliman home. John Milliman was sheriff here in Cuba County for a few years. John's family grew up here. John also had a son, John Milliman, who graduated from Wilkes-Barre. He ended up being a vice president of a corporation in New York City. John did very well. He has two sisters still living out in Sandusky, Ohio. But John and his wife, Marion, both have passed on. Mason Street, Route 90. This area here where this trailer was our First National Bank of Genoa. And started about 1921 and it went out during the Depression. It was sold in 1931. They closed the bank and they sold the property in 1931. That was the First National Bank of Genoa. It also, after that, it became Dr. Stewart home. Dr. Stewart was one of three doctors that we had here in Genoa at one time. Dr. Stewart and Dr. Skinner and Dr. Guard. And we had the hospital up here and the short line shuffled according to reading nurses and doctors back and forth from Auburn or Ithaca for our hospital for operations and things. That was at that time of the year.
Was there a lot more people living here in those days? Like population-wise?
There were. Where the homes, I don't know. The population was a little greater. Yep.
You didn't have to go anyplace, everything was right
There
here.
was a lot of businesses
Yeah.
at one time.
And I think I read,
Catherine
the
Street.
population was almost double in the early 1800s.
I can remember the Henry Stack family. Henry was Henry Stackenwich. He shortened his name to Henry Stack. He was a lawyer here in town.
I barely remember.
He was a great promoter. Henry probably was 20, 25 years before his time. But he was a promoter.
I remember him.
A lot like, if anybody remembers Gordon Cummings. Gordon was a this area up in here was the Genoa Academy. Originally dates back to 1849. The Genoa Academy sat here. It was a wooden construction. If you can find the pictures of it, Laurie or Rachel. It sat It sat here on this north end, and after they got the built, this was 1849, the Genoa Academy, and then in around 1939, they finished building this building, and then they tore down the old wooden structure, which was 2 stories. The ground story originally was for classrooms. The upstairs was like a meeting hall. They had a stage and pews that would accommodate close to 100 people on the second floor, and then in later years that was converted into classrooms.
Do you think the original academy was affiliated with the Presbyterian Church?
No, I don't know. Has been right up until this past winter owned by the church, the Presbyterian Church. This is where our ministers, the parsonage was. It was sold to a private family from Cortland, and that's where the parsonage was.
For which church?
The Presbyterian Church. Yeah. And Federated Church. United Church.
United Church. No.
This home over here, I recall, is owned by the Ecker family. He was a druggist here in town. And
Wrong,
that's
Pete. Pete, that one there was Eckers.
or across Eckers.
Yeah.
And then Meg moved
This
in
was
over
Alice
here.
Gay's.
Alice. Yeah. Okay. Eckers ended up selling theirs to the Lives, right? And
Yeah.
the Manzaris before
We were there.
You
I
were-
was there 18 years of my life.
your life.
Are
Yeah.
you Butch?
Yeah. It didn't look like it does now.
No. So
It used to be beautiful.
Which one's that?
the gay family. This piece of property was just sold maybe a couple, 3 years ago.
Sherm Wright lived there. He was the mail carrier with a horse.
And he raced horses, didn't
I don't know.
he? Or yeah.
And this was Fred Wood.
Fred Wood before Buddy Beckle.
Yeah.
Was there any
Who was that
buildings
back
in
there?
this vacant lot here?
Not that I ever remember.
Hagen? Wasn't that the Hagen house?
It sold Model A Ford. The rink was right beside it.